Hello and welcome to Sim.bc, which right now is 18:30 in the evening, not even pre-evening, mates. We're talking clear-cut, fresh evening as it will be. But even though it's evening, outside it's a yellow bright sun out there who's just shining on the blue sky, and I for once wanna go out there, yeah? So my entire idea today is that we're gonna look at finishing somewhere around 10 minutes, maybe 15 if we get into a good discussion, because I want to have the time to go out and enjoy the sun. Why am I talking about enjoying the sun at 6:30 in the evening, you might ask? Well, there is an obvious solution for that, or an obvious reason rather, and that reason being that I've spent like my entire day in school. Now, some of you might say, wow, welcome to my world. You know, I'm actually stuck in a work, or not stuck, that's the wrong word, wrong way of putting it, but you might say, well, I am in a job where I'm working 9 to 5, you know. So, what's the big deal? Well, I tell you what the big deal is. The big deal is that I'm sitting inside in a very little kind of office space, right? In a little room, staring into different walls and just being met by critique from every different possible direction, not just about the YouTube channel, mate, even though that was brought up at one point by my group mates, which is always encouraged, right? I mean, the more critique, the more we can grow.
Or at least that's what I tell myself when I'm about to cry.
Anyway, no, what I've also been looking at is, as I've been stating before, the different way of analyzing our statistics, because we've found some things in our questionnaires that were done for our thesis. We reworked the entire research question, yeah, we're all fine, all good, all dandy at the moment, but we want to work with descriptive analysis, yeah, which is obvious according to us, because we're gonna look at different frequencies, and yes, we've changed it, as I said. We're gonna look at different frequencies as different things occur in the industry, in the area that we're looking at. However, our tutor is bound on to say, well, you know, you don't only want to do that, you also want to do a bit of inferential statistics. And we're like, no, we don't. We haven't designed the research, you know, in a way that will work. We don't have any control variables for any regressions, linear, simple, or multiple, you know. We can't do any of that stuff. And he's like, how about binary? And we're like, that's not how binary works. That's just, you know, creating a distribution. He's like, what about trinary or whatever he says? And we're like, or trinomial. And we're like, dude, no, it still doesn't work. That's just working with probabilities, yeah? Not something that we're actually gonna do or utilize. And he was like, yeah, sure. But I still think that you should do it though. What about the factor analysis? And we were like, yeah, that's pretty close. And he was like, what about the content analysis? And we're like, now we're talking content analysis, probably something we can do. We can see if we can work it in there. Probably ain't, yeah, because we're still gonna look at frequencies, because nothing else is going to actually answer our research question. I know I'm ranting a bit, but that is what I've been met with today. So I've actually haven't made any real progress at the work as of today, which is kind of irritating, because I spent the entire day in school. And it's always heartbreaking to just walk out and realize, you know what I did today? And your friends are like, no, what? And you're like, absolutely nothing. I just, you know, rescheduled, changed some stuff, took some tables from here and put them down there. And that's basically what I did. Just in order to make the future work more simple. But anyway, it looks like we're getting somewhere. But that is not what you're here for now, is it? No. And you all probably know what you're here for, because you've watched it in the title, yeah, of the video. Maybe in the thumbnail if I feel a bit fancy throwing it in there. Probably ain't, you know. But still, I don't, so I'm just gonna take a look at me notes here, and oh my world, this is gonna be great. I mean, there are rarely times when I can truly say what I feel, and many of you are gonna be like, hey, wait, you do that all the time. That's not correct, mate. You do it every single day. It's always your opinions, your feelings, your interpretations of statistical analysis, of data, of articles, of whatever you've been reading recently. And yet, while that is true, I'm still trying, at times, most of the times I'd argue, to be a bit, you know, ain't tainting it so much with my own strict opinion, yeah? Because that tends to not be the best thing in the world, makes it very biased, you know. But today is going to be one of those really controversial videos, yeah? So I'm just gonna warn you by now, yeah? This probably gonna try and put up some form of disclaimer. Maybe I'm gonna forget it, but anyway, just remember I had the intention of doing it. disclaimer for all of you out there. This is gonna probably be a bit of a really controversial video tackling some topics that in general people don't like to talk about, because as I was raised, yet again we're coming back to that, putting the context, the cultural caging, I'm a Swede, applied to logic not religion, you know, all of those good things. Logical thinking, logical reasoning, and I was raised with the mindset of you shouldn't discuss what you earn, you shouldn't discuss politics, and you shouldn't discuss religion. Why? Well, because people are hell-bent on these things already. They're probably on one side of the spectrum or the other, or if they're in between, they probably ain't gonna change their mind that much. So what does it really matter if you discuss these things or not? I mean, just imagine you coming up to someone and you say, hi, I earn like 40,000 crowns, and the other person is like, I earn 35,000 crowns. Now, the only thing you've done is like stating two different incomes. The worst thing is if you actually do the same kind of job, even worse if you're at the same kind of department. Because what are you going to do then? You're just going to be there. I earn more than you, but we do the same work. You see, the conversation there isn't really developing. Same goes for politics. You're standing on one side of the edge and screaming like, I want this country to be ruled in a certain way. And the other people are like, we want the same thing but differently. We want it to be ruled in a different way. And that's basically all that you end up with. And then we have religion that people tend to enjoy talking about, because everybody is like, oh, we know religion, it's all about love and you know, it's all about those turning the other cheek around or whatever. But those conversations don't necessarily tend to go in that direction. Now, do they? And that's why I'm also saying, you know, there are other things that I think that we shouldn't discuss, but I'm gonna discuss anyway. Not just religion, right? But since I was opening up the door as of yesterday, I thought I'd be walking right in. I'd be a fool not to take on the momentum here, yeah? Not to capitalize on what we've already been doing, you know. Because why not? I mean, I'm gonna burn anyway, right? So, what am I gonna talk about? Well, I'm not gonna take a definitive stance on this issue, or on this, well, it's really gonna look like it, yeah? Just remember, before I go into it, I have no definitive stance on this. I just have a reasoning behind it. I'm not saying that what I'm gonna state is true or false, yeah? Just gonna say, this is my way of viewing it, Okay, so what I actually saw in my notes was ignorance and arrogance. And what I love to take up in comparison or in conjunction with ignorance and arrogance is, and I can't imagine I'm gonna say this in a video that's gonna end up online, does God exist, yeah? Because that's the one thing that everybody likes to discuss back and forth for all of eternity, right? It's always out there. And why am I connecting this to arrogance and ignorance? Arrogance being you have an opinion that you believe is superior to other people's, right? You believe that you are more important. That's how we're defining it here right now. And arrogance that's arrogance. And ignorance, and ignorance being more of the part of, well, I can see your argument, but I'm still not gonna follow that. That's the two different positions that we're going to take up today. The two different things that I'm going to try and combat, explain, try to analyze, not analyze, but I'm just going to present you with a case of how I view these things in a very controversial topic to help with that. Yeah? So that's what we're going to do. Probably fun for the whole family, right? So on the one hand of the discussion, you have people saying, yeah, God exists, right? Fine and dandy. On the other hand, you have people saying God doesn't exist. And then we have probably the most of us, you know, the 80% I'd say, usually I'd say 95, but there are a lot of people on both of these different spectrums. But let's say that the rest of us, like the 80%, are standing in the middle and we're like, we don't know what to believe, try to convince us, right? Or you say, well, I am not taking a definitive stance on this because I don't feel like I have to. If it exists, if God exists, it exists, and that's all good. I don't need God to exist for me to be a good person, right? But if God exists, then it probably ain't gonna be a bad thing that I've been doing good things in my life. On the other hand, if it doesn't exist, well, I can do good things just for my own sake, right? Because I like doing good things. Standing a bit in the middle. I'm one of these people who are standing in the middle. Now, but what I'm observing of these two different directions, so to say, or rather, well, kind of my semi-stance on it as well, is that people are so arrogant, and they might not, this is the worst thing, even realize that they are. Because on the one hand, you have people saying you have no proof that God actually exists, right? And this is commonly the most used, no empirical evidence, you have no observations, you can't really prove it, right? And then saying that God doesn't exist because of this. Well, on the other hand, the other people who are trying to appeal to the same kind of logic are saying, and this is kind of what we're going to focus on today, is that, well, you don't have any knowledge or any empirical evidence that he doesn't exist, or she, whatever, that God doesn't exist. And we're at a stalemate, right? But I think that, which is fine, in a way. We don't go anywhere really with the discussion or the argumentation. People are generally just reiterating the same points over and over again. There is no evidence. Well, you have no evidence to support that it isn't true. But you have no evidence to support it's true. You understand what I'm saying? It's like a court case with an infinite amount of time just put on it. With a lawyer and a prosecutor trying to state the obvious to the other party while that party is trying to say the obvious to the, a separate party and to the relative party. And they both are trying to say that they're so right in what they're saying. And I ain't saying that none of them are wrong. But I ain't necessarily saying that none of them are right either, right? I'm in the middle on this. But why do I love to talk about arrogance and ignorance in comparison to this? Well, obviously, it's the ignorance of saying that. Well, they kind of have a point there of saying that we have no support that God doesn't exist, but not listening to it. And on the other hand, saying, wow, we have no evidence that God exists, but we're still gonna argue against it. That's ignorance within its finest now, isn't it? The ignorance of saying, well, yeah, you aren't correct, so we're gonna just, shift that and use it back towards you. Which in general, I would argue, is kind of a good argumentation technique. You take what they said, you change it around, and you throw it back at their face, right? So you're reusing their argument, which yet again is a good argumentation technique. But this has been going on for the latest 1,000 years, latest 400 years, something along those lines. People stating the obvious, so to say, to the other party, which is yet again leading me into this discussion of, well, it's kind of ignorant now, isn't it? Because as we know, both of these parties have these two different arguments that they're throwing against each other that doesn't really mean anything, doesn't really bring anything. And whilst both parties probably knows this, they still continue stating them, which is really ignorant. And I was on the side of, God doesn't exist, the entire thing, in the entire spectrum, until I realized, and we're gonna slide into arrogance here, right? That how arrogant am I, right? To even bring up that argument to begin with. To bring up that you have there's no evidence that God actually exists. I mean, how arrogant is that? Of me saying that God doesn't exist if I can't disprove it, right? As long as I cannot disprove that God doesn't exist, how arrogant is it of me to say that God doesn't exist? I mean, I can't really make a definitive stance on this because there is no evidence supporting it, which is what I've been saying as well, in a way. So many people who come to that conclusion, like me, they move into the middle, yeah? And there are some fanatics who still are out there, right? Still out there on the spectrum, like, no, God doesn't exist because you can't prove it. And you're like, but you can disprove it. And they're like, no, but I still apply to logic. And you're like, no, you don't. If you can't disprove it, then you don't apply to logic. You just apply to a stance that you've taken, right? Which is why most of us, I'd say, talking for everybody here, right? I'm sure nobody minds that, moves in towards the middle a bit more, being like, well, maybe God exists. I don't take a definitive stance on it because I can't disprove it. However, the bigger problem with arrogance is the people who don't realize it. As I said, the fanatics on the other side, stating like, God doesn't exist. Those people, arrogant. But on the other hand, we have all of the religious people who are standing there and saying full-fledged, straight in the back, chest out, proud as lions, just stating, God exists. And you're just like, if I moved into the middle, yeah, I'm open to the discussion, so I moved away from my side of the argument, moved it a bit more towards the middle, because I feel like this is a discussion that's interesting. It might not be worth having, because in the end, we have no proof. But still, it's kind of interesting, you go around, and you learn talking to people, you learn discussion, you learn argumentation, which is all fine, also good, all dandy, as I said. But then you have all of these people on the other side of the spectrum who tends to, and yet again, this is based on my experience and my experience alone, right? I can't talk for everybody, but in my life, it has been the case that all these religious people, they just refuse to back down from where they're standing. It's like they're standing in the something really loud happened outside. But anyway, it's like they're standing on a pedestal and they're just like, well, we're elevated in comparison to you guys. We really know what we're talking about. Yeah? How can you disprove anything I'm saying? You cannot. That means I'm not technically wrong. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that's true in a way. But how arrogant, yeah? How arrogant, isn't it, saying God exists? I mean, just that statement, yeah? And I mean that hope, sure, that's a thing that you can support. The notion of that there is something out there, sure, you can support that. But how arrogant, isn't it, in saying God exists when you can't actually prove that it does? And yet again, we can disprove that it doesn't, right? So how arrogant is it of us to say that it doesn't? But still, the arrogant part is that saying that, God exists. Now, this isn't really what is irritating me, because you have the fanatics on one side, or I'm seeing them as fanatics based on logical assumptions and logical discussion, argumentation fanatics, not fanatics who actually do anything physical, right? Just argumentation fanatics. And they're on the one side saying, religion is, God exists, not religion necessarily, because I don't think they're connected. Anyway, God exists, and they still say that they apply to logic, but they refuse to back down from their pedestal. And then on the other side, you have more people who tend to back down, but there still are some few that are still left. However, the worst kind of arrogance, and I can stress this enough, and I realize now that I only have 3.5 minutes left, so I might stretch this a bit fast, in which we'll probably talk about tomorrow, is that in this group of maniacs, yeah, because not all of them, of course not all of them, that say that God exists, and I still apply logic, there are the people who have the backbone of saying that in my religion's God is different to yours. I realize that this is a really controversial topic, so we're gonna save it until tomorrow. So I can so I can speak my mind on a bit of a Friday, get that good Friday vibe, get that good Friday feeling, and just trashing all of the people who are of different religions out there. I'm not saying they're gonna trash all of them, most of them are probably sane, like a good 95%. But then you have those... I don't want to say idiots, because it probably is the wrong word, but you have these close-minded people who, and yet again, I'm just talking about the people who argue that they do apply to logic and still behave in this way, which I can't even fathom. Anyway, we're gonna save that for tomorrow, because we're gonna talk about all of the, well, my religion is different from yours, and I'm just like, dude, what? I mean, sure, and we're still going to talk about in the context of, does God exist or not? Because usually what these people tend to do is argue back and forth about, my God exists, but yours doesn't. And I'm like, what? So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. Stay tuned for that. It's probably going to be interesting seeing me, just putting this out on the internet and see, hell rises from beneath. And as I said, I'm gonna burn. I know that. I'm content with that information, yeah. And we probably spoke a bit over 15 minutes, even though I kind of tried to put a restriction on me. And I can see that the sun is gonna go down soon. You can see that even through the curtains. This is all good, all nice, all dandy. Have a nice one, mates. And I will join up tomorrow. I will join you tomorrow with the rest of this discussion. Have a nice day, mates. See ya.